Hello, and welcome to another comparison video. Today I'm going to be talking about the story The Secret of Shadow Ranch. I'm going to be comparing the novel from 1965 with the computer game from 2004. And it is important to note that this is the version from 1965. For those who may not know, much of the original stories were revised in the 60s, including this one. The original stories had 25 chapters, whereas the rewrites had 20, and parts of the storylines were tweaked. In the case of this novel, the original, which was written in 1931, is titled The Secret at Shadow Ranch, and the storyline is vastly different than what we read in the 1965 edition. And it's quite clear that Her Interactive based their game on the 65 story. These two stories have, I think, 3 elements in common, and that's it. So that's how different the two novels are. So again, I'm just really stressing we are comparing the book from 1965, The Secret of Shadow Ranch, and not the 1931 story, The Secret at Shadow Ranch. So with that, let's talk about the right book. So this is book number 5 of the Nancy Drew mystery stories, entitled The Secret of Shadow Ranch. So in this adventure, we have Nancy, who's been invited to join Bess and George on vacation at Shadow Ranch, which is owned by the Raleighs, Ed and Elizabeth, who are the aunt and uncle to both of the cousins. But there's a phantom horse that keeps coming into the property, and it's threatening to cut their vacation short, because whenever it appears, chaos ensues. But the chaos starts before Nancy even arrives at the ranch. When she first lands in Arizona, her bag is rifled through by a stranger, and inside her bag she finds a threat, telling her and her friends to stay away from the ranch. And shortly thereafter, as the girls are driving to the ranch, their car breaks down. So they have a lot happening as soon as Nancy begins her vacation. She also learns that Shadow Ranch is said to be cursed. Dirk Valentine, who is an outlaw, had fallen in love with a woman named Frances Humber. Her father was the sheriff and owned Shadow Ranch, and he had Dirk Valentine shot on sight, which happened to be on their property. And his death is said to have caused this curse on the property. So we've got a bunch of these historical elements that are influencing the story while Nancy's there. But on top of that, we have a current mystery. So Alice Rieger, who is a cousin to both Bess and George, has come to Shadow Ranch because her father has been missing for 6 months, and someone thought they had seen him in the area. So she is hoping to find him, and she's also hoping to enlist Nancy's help to locate him. So we have a lot going on in this novel. We have these stories about an outlaw and a treasure that he hid for his beloved. We have a phantom horse where trouble comes shortly after it leaves. And then we have this missing family member. So all of the characters that we have in this story include Dave Gregory, Tex Britton, and Bud Moore, who are all fairly local full-time cowboys. There's Shorty Steele, who is more of a drifter but a cowboy, and he's temporarily working at Shadow Ranch. We have Mrs. Thurmond, who is the cook, Walt Sanders, who is their foreman, and of course we have Ed and Elizabeth Raleigh, who are the owners and aunt and uncle to Bess and George, as well as to Alice. Mary Deer, who owns a shop in Tumbleweed. Alice and Ross Rieger, so more family members. Al Diamond, who is sort of a not-so-friendly fellow. And Mr. Bursey, aka Sid Bryce. So as Nancy and her friends try to figure out what's going on with the phantom horse, they also seek out Dirk Valentine's treasure and are trying to find Ross Rieger all at the same time. And they have such a short period of time to be trying to solve all of these mysteries. And in the end, spoiler alert, Shorty, Al, and Sid are the responsible parties. They kidnapped Ross Rieger, who had walked in on the trio when they were robbing a bank, and they took him with them when they went to Shadow Ranch to search for Dirk Valentine's treasure. And of course, they are also causing the trouble while they look for the treasure. So that is the novel, The Secret of Shadow Ranch. Once again, there's a lot happening there. It is quite a deep story. So now we can look at its counterpart, which is the 10th Nancy Drew game, and shares its title, The Secret of Shadow Ranch. In this adventure, Nancy has once again been invited to Shadow Ranch by Bess and George and their relatives. And upon her arrival, she learns of this phantom horse that keeps appearing at night. And after it's been sighted, trouble erupts. Part of the property is damaged, there is sabotage, things are not going well for the Raleighs who have just bought this property. And along the way, Nancy unearths these long-lost messages from Dirk Valentine to Francis Humber. And she learns that he's hidden this treasure for her, and she begins this search herself. So the characters in the game include Dave Gregory, who is a ranch hand, Tex Britton, who is the foreman, Shorty Thurmond, the cook, Mary Yazzie, who owns a shop, Charlena Purcell, who is a source of information for Nancy and is a novelist, and Bet and Ed Raleigh, who again have invited Nancy, and we speak with them over the telephone. They're not there in person because of an accident relating to the phantom horse. And the way this story wraps up is Nancy is, of course, trying to search for this treasure and figure out who's behind all the trouble. And it winds up being Shorty and his friends who are using a trained horse, making it appear as though it's a phantom. And they're using it to distract and cause trouble while they search for gold. So that is the computer game, The Secret of Shadow Ranch. And now we can do some comparisons between the two mediums. So of course the first thing I like to look at is the storyline. So in both of them, Nancy has been invited to Shadow Ranch for a holiday. And while she's there, she investigates this phantom horse and starts looking for this rumored treasure that Dirk Valentine left behind. In addition to this, the book has another storyline involving Alice and her missing father, and Nancy helps in this search. So that's the only difference. There's this slight omission from the book. Then we can look at the location, which is also the same. It takes place sort of in the Shadow Mountain area. Shadow Ranch is just at the base there. And also Tumbleweed. We have this reference to a nearby town. And of course, it's all located in Arizona. And then I get to look at names. I haven't had to do this in a while. Every now and then, Her Interactive has changed the names of characters. And they're usually minor, and that's the case here as well. So we have two characters in this game where names have been adjusted. The first is that of Shorty. His last name has been changed. In the book, it's Steele. In the computer game, it's Thurmond. And I'll explain this change a little bit later on, but you may have figured it out already. And then there's Mary, whose last name was also changed from Deer to Yazzie. This one I don't have a reason for why they changed it beyond perhaps it was just something they wanted to do. Perhaps Her Interactive did not like that she was given the name Deer, wanted to use Yazzie. I couldn't say for sure. But there's no connection that I can find to them using the name Yazzie rather than Deer in the game. So now let's start looking at the characters. And just broadly speaking, most of them are about the same between the two versions. There aren't a whole lot of differences. Dave is the best example of this. He is a descendant of Francis Humber, and he works at Shadow Ranch, and he is secretly searching for Dirk Valentine's treasure. His personality is also the same between the two. He's initially a little bit cool toward Nancy, but then he warms up to her and is really a very nice fellow. Where we have a slight change is how he's related to Francis. In the book, he's a direct descendant. He's, a grandson or great-great-grandson, along that line. Whereas in the game, he's a descendant of her cousin Ellie. It's a very minor difference there. Overall, Dave Gregory is the same person. Tex, on the other hand, is a little different. He's an employee of Shadow Ranch. That's where things are the same. Things are a little different beyond that. In the book, he is a nice young cowboy, and he's friendly with the guests. He is attractive. He's a fairly positive, kind fellow. In the game, on the other hand, he's gruff and he's older and he's a foreman, so his role is a little bit different. He has more responsibility in the computer game. And they've taken this from the book character of Walt Sanders. He was the foreman in the book, and her interactive really didn't need to include both Tex and Walt. So I really like that they've merged the two book characters to create their own version of Tex. And this character in the game is sort of doubtful about Nancy's abilities. He's really discouraging toward her. He doesn't think she's going to be able to handle ranch life, that she's not going to know anything about horses. She's not going to be able to rope that sawhorse. So he's not really encouraging toward her. He also has a sister, Jane Nash, who used to work for the Raleighs. Jane Nash, or any element of a sister, was not in the book. That is just brand new for the game. Now we can look at Shorty. So he also was an employee at Shadow Ranch, and in both versions he teamed up with bank robbers. They're his buddies, and he is searching for Valentine's treasure. He uses the phantom horse to instill fear, and he uses the horse as a distraction while he does his dirty deeds. Now, in the book, he is sort of a wandering cowboy, and he rides bucking broncos as part of his character. In the game, however, he's a cook at the ranch. And he also admits to looking for gold. Not necessarily Dirk Valentine's, but he is hoping to search for gold in the hills. And as previously noted, his last name has changed. In the book it was Steele, in the computer game it's Thurmond. Mrs. Thurmond from the book was the cook. So once again we have a case of two book characters being merged into one in the game. We didn't need to have the cook separate from Shorty. We didn't need to have more than one cowboy either in the game. Having the cook be the role for Shorty created some more diversity, and I really appreciate that they took the last name of the original cook from the book and gave it to Shorty. So again, we're tying in a bunch of little elements here, and I just think that's such a great thing that her interactive did. So now we can look at the character of Mary. So she owns a store and sells these locally made goods. In the book, she's a young woman, and her store is robbed. Nancy happens to be walking by while Mary is out next door having a coffee, and she sees a gentleman, I shouldn't say a gentleman, she sees a man stealing from her shop. Nancy intervenes, prevents the theft from actually occurring. The man runs off and leaves the loot behind. And as a reward, Mary gives Nancy this watch. Now this watch is not something that she had for sale. It was sort of a showcase piece. She'd received it from someone who was a friend of Frances Humber, and it used to belong to Dirk Valentine. And inside this watch, we have these photos and this clue of Green Bottle Inn, which really sets Nancy on her search for Dirk's treasure. So this first interaction with Mary is really important in the book. In addition to that moment, it's worth noting that she also sells this drawing to Nancy, which when Alice sees it, she realizes her father made that drawing. It's his pastel artwork. So it also helps lead to that search for Ross. So once again, that interaction with Mary is incredibly important in the book. In the game, Mary's a bit different. I'd say she's a little bit older than she's described in the book. She's trying to buy land from the Raleighs, sort of unsuccessfully, and her relationship with them is a little bit tense. And she, despite all this, she has this trunk that she got from them, and Nancy winds up opening it for her, and she's allowed to take something from this trunk as a reward. And that again is where Nancy gets that watch with a photo and a clue in it. So once again, Mary serves as the as our opening to look for clues for Dirk's treasure. And on top of all this, she's also secretly dating Tex. So her character, as far as personality and behavior, is different between mediums, but she is this driving force for Nancy doing some of her searches. Okay, so now I'm not going to talk about more of the characters on their own. I'm just going to talk about sort of how they're grouped together, the remaining characters from the book. And this is with regard to missing family. So we have Ross Rieger, who already mentioned is the father of Alice. He's an uncle to both Bess and George, and he's been missing for half a year. And Nancy is enlisted by Alice to help look for him. She knows that Nancy's a detective and really is hoping she's going to be able to track him down. And it turns out he was kidnapped when he walked in on a bank robbery. And this was already noted when talking about some of the other characters. But just to go into more detail, he also makes these pastel drawings, and they serve as clues to being able to find him, because Alice recognizes his artwork. And Sid Bryce goes by the alias Mr. Bursing, claims to be the artist, and he's the one actually selling Ross's art and keeping the money for himself. And Ross is simply doing this art to keep himself busy, but it winds up being this great clue for finding him. And we also learn that he's being held captive in around the Shadow Ranch property because the bank robbers had taken Ross with them when they decided to go to Shadow Ranch and pursue Valentine's treasure. So we have this whole other storyline that's only in the book. We don't have any elements of it in the computer game. And then we can talk about the Phantom Horse. So it's simply a distraction, and it appears right before Shorty and his buddies create chaos. So it is there to cause havoc and worry. So in the book, Nancy actually chases after the horse. She's unsuccessful, but she does pursue it. In the game, this doesn't happen, but also in the game, it leaves behind a horseshoe one night after it's been on site. And it sort of leads this clue to the ghost town, which I'll talk about now. The ghost town in the book is a place where Nancy and her friends go only once. And in that town, they find a crushed pastel. So again, a clue to Ross Rieger. While there, they're searching through the buildings looking for clues. Nancy happened to have seen this one figure, and this person wound up going over to where there are some rocks and pushing one down, creating a rock slide, and it hurtles towards the building where Nancy is. The building slides down the hillside. Fortunately, Nancy survives, but she's in a very precarious situation. After that, the girls don't go back to the ghost town. In the game, Nancy goes there quite often, and she also learns that Dirk Valentine was held prisoner in the town, and that's also where he's left behind clues. And Nancy also solves a bunch of puzzles while in Dry Creek. Dry Creek is also the name given only in the game. It's not mentioned in the book. So second to last thing is the treasure. So we know that Dirk left clues behind for Frances to find, to help her find, rather, his treasure of gold hearts. And it is gold hearts in both the book and the game, which is really cool in my opinion. There's this old photo in a watch, which has a reference to a green bottle, and that's really what helps lead Nancy to finding these other clues, which ultimately lead to her discovery of the treasure. And the treasure is located in ancient cliff dwellings. So then the last thing to discuss is, of course, the ending. So I'll start by looking at the book. Nancy has sort of figured out that Shorty and these other fellows she's come across are behind the trouble. She can't prove it, but based on their behavior, she's kind of gauged this. So she tricks them by making this announcement at a meal one day, saying she's figured out where the treasure is, and the ranch hands are going to go dig it up. And this is so that the baddies follow the ranch hands, while Nancy and her friends head off to the cliff dwellings, where they believe the treasure is actually hidden. And while they're at the cliff apartments, they find Ross Rieger. He's been relocated there, he's hidden there. And they also wind up finding the treasure, which has been hidden in a vase in one of the rooms. Now, unfortunately, Shorty and his friends realize that they were deceived, and they move over to the cliff dwellings. In order not to be caught, or rather not to be stuck there, because the men have now threatened to keep all the people captive. They also threaten to blow up the cliff dwellings with dynamite that they have there. Nancy picks up a rock and throws it over the cliff, pretending she's thrown the treasure overboard. So Sid and Shorty head off to try and reclaim the treasure that they think has been thrown over this cliff. And Al is standing guard, and ultimately Nancy just tries to stall because she was meant to send a smoke signal, or rather a fire signal, to Dave and the sheriff to let them know once they'd found the gold. And essentially through all this stalling, this gives Dave and the sheriff time to come to the cliff dwellings, capture Sid and Shorty, who are on their way down, and then to eventually capture Al and free the girls and Ross. And that's how the book winds up. In the game, there are some similarities in terms of Nancy being at the cliff dwellings. She has to go through this maze in order to find where the treasure is. And along the way, she peeks through these vases and finds keys, and these keys open a door that bar the treasure. Nancy finds the gold hearts, and as she's about to leave, she sees Shorty, who, unbeknownst to her, followed her. He also ran off her horse, and now he's going to try and get the treasure from Nancy. Nancy quickly hides and realizes she can trick Shorty. She changes some door markers so that he goes through the wrong door. He winds up falling onto a drop-off where he's stuck. Nancy rides off and sends for the sheriff, and then that concludes the story. So some similarities primarily in terms of being at the cliff dwellings and this incorporation of vases. So to conclude, this 1965 retelling of the original 31 has this additional storyline that the 2004 computer game did not include. So beyond this omission, the two stories are very much alike. They have the same characters. I mean, there are very few changes in terms of the people that we interact with, but also many of the events are kept in. So I have this reference to a rattlesnake. We see or hear one a few times in the game. In the book, with the threat that Nancy finds, there is the rattle from a snake. So this very small element from the original story was still incorporated, albeit in a very different way, into the game. We also have the sabotaged water pump. That is from the book, was put into the game. We have a watch as a reward, which again is really what drives part of Nancy's searching for Dirk's treasure. And that watch leads to the green bottle and the cellar. The green bottle with this message of, with a message inside it, which helps lead to the treasure. And we're looking for the green bottle in the cellar. And we have Dave, who's in the cellar. Nancy catches him snooping there. And that's where we learn that he's a descendant, or a relative rather, of Francis Humber. And that he's looking for this treasure to help him and his siblings. And of course we have the vases in the cliff dwellings. Again, something very minor. In the book, again, that treasure was found in a vase. We don't find the treasure in a vase in the game, but the keys that lead to the treasure are all in vases. So these small little things that may be done in different ways, but are taken from the original story and incorporated into the game in such wonderful ways. Just a wonderful job done from translating this book to game. The whole plot, with the exception again of Alice and her dad, is the same, relating to this hidden treasure by a thief who has fallen in love with the sheriff's daughter. And we have this phantom horse which appears whenever there is trouble. It precedes chaos on the ranch. And we have Shorty and his bank robber buddies who are responsible. This really is a lively romantic story that was so well depicted, and in my view, it's no wonder that both the book and the game are fan favorites. This was such a wonderful story. I love playing this game, which admittedly was not always the case. There was a brief period when I wasn't enjoying the game and I took a break from it and couldn't understand why people thought it was so wonderful, and played it again eventually and realized, of course, people love this game. What a great story. There's so much in it, and it's so upbeat and lively. And the story that it's based on is so great. And, you know, we're told right when we look at the box, this is based on the best-selling Nancy Drew book of all time. Well, no wonder. This story is just phenomenal. And again, all the work that her interactive put into it. is just so great. And I should also mention, and I didn't quite in these words before, this is one of the earliest stories ever written of the Nancy Drew series. This is sort of a first for her Interactive, having taken a story from what they're calling the Classic Mystery Edition. Slightly misleading because it's a revised story. The original from 31 is, again, incredibly different. But I do like that this is an early story that her Interactive based a game on, whereas the previous 9 are newer stories, if you will. I think that's all I have to say doing this comparison. It's been a lot of fun. I'd actually read the 31 and 65 books back in February. I was really curious sort of to see what had been changed in terms of book to game, and then discovered all these changes between just 2 books. And I think part of that's what's driven me to do these videos, to do the playthroughs and then these comparisons, because that was quite an eye-opener. It was really enlightening. And I'm hoping that those who are following are also finding this to be a great learning opportunity to see how her Interactive worked and see what they decided to keep from their source material. And in this case, they've kept a whole lot. They cut out one subplot, and it would have been too much. It would have made the game far too complicated. I think people would have been confused if they'd included the Rieger storyline. So I think her Interactive made a very wise decision in eliminating that when they created the game. So once again, I'm just going to praise this. It's such a good game. Such a great rendering of a book to computer adventure. It's fantastic. So hats off to her Interactive with this one. I do think it is one of their better projects. It is superbly done. I will leave it there, and I will see you guys, I don't know, in a few weeks, I hope. My next video is not going to be a playthrough, nor will it be a comparison video. I'm hoping to do sort of a recap of what I've been able to investigate these last several months and with the first 10 games and books. So I'm really looking forward to doing that, and I'm hoping that it's going to be a lot of fun. Once again, I thank you for your time, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.